Welcome, my dear wizard. Tonight, we turn to the life of a man whose story is filled with shadows, secrets, and unseen courage. Severus Snape. His journey is not one of simple heroism or easy love, but of complex choices, deep loyalty, and a devotion that endured until his last breath. Before we begin, if my stories bring you comfort, please tap the thumbs up and subscribe so you can join me for more magical nights. And if you'd like, leave a comment with your location and the time where you are. I love seeing where my fellow wizards are listening from. Now, we will wander through Snape's childhood in Spinner's End, his years as a Slytherin, his connection with Lily Evans, his time among the Death Eaters, and his hidden role as Dumbledore's most trusted spy. We will see how his life was filled with loss, with duty, and with a love that never faded. And so, let us begin in a small industrial town with a lonely boy whose life would one day change the course of the wizarding world. Severus Snape was born on the 9th of January, 1960, in a place that could hardly be called welcoming. His childhood home stood in Spinner's End, a narrow street in an old industrial town in northern England. The air was heavy with soot from abandoned mills. The river nearby ran sluggish and polluted, and the rows of houses leaned shoulder to shoulder, all identical in their weary brick and grimy windows. It was a world of smoke and shadows, a far cry from the magic that would one day define him. Inside one of those houses lived the Snape family. Tobias, a muggle with a temper as sharp as his words, and Eileen Prince, a witch from an old but diminished wizarding family. Their marriage was not a happy one. Arguments often spilled through the thin walls, voices raised in bitterness. For young Severus, the sounds of quarrels were as common as the creak of the floorboards. He grew up in an atmosphere of tension, where affection was scarce and where silence became his shield. Yet even in such a place, sparks of magic found their way to him. Snape discovered his abilities early, and unlike many magical children who burst with joy at their first accidental spell, he regarded his own talents with quiet intensity. He was not surprised by them. He expected them, perhaps even depended on them. For in a house where love was rare, magic became his secret refuge. It was proof that he was different, that he belonged to something beyond the smoke-stained walls of Spinner's End. His mother, Eileen, recognized his gifts and nurtured them when she could. A witch herself, she had once been a member of the proud Prince family, though her life with Tobias was far removed from the wizarding world she came from. She taught her son bits of spell work, whispered fragments of lore, and shared her knowledge of potions. Snape listened with rapt attention, absorbing every detail, every incantation, every stirring of a cauldron. Where other children played in the streets, he crouched in corners with scraps of parchment, scribbling notes about herbs, roots, and the strange reactions of mixtures he dared to attempt with whatever he could find in the kitchen. Poverty marked his childhood. His clothes were second-hand, patched and ill-fitting, his hair lank and greasy because there was little care for more. Other children sometimes mocked him for his appearance, and Snape withdrew further into himself, his sharp mind turning inward. In those long, quiet hours, he grew observant, learning to read not only books, but people. He noticed every slight, every tone of voice, every flicker of expression. In Spinner's End, survival required vigilance. It was by the river that his world first shifted toward something brighter. One summer's day, he saw two girls playing in the grass nearby, Lily and Petunia Evans. They were sisters, ordinary muggles, or so it seemed. But as Snape watched, he saw Lily leap from the ground without touching it, her fall slowed by some invisible force, a laugh of pure delight on her face. It was magic, unmistakable. Cautiously, he approached, drawn to her as if by instinct. He revealed what he knew, speaking of wands and spells, of the hidden world that existed alongside the Muggle one. Petunia scoffed, fearful and suspicious. But Lily listened. For Snape, who had lived so long in loneliness, Lily's attention was like sunlight breaking through soot-stained clouds. She became his first true friend. Together, they shared secrets of magic, exploring the possibilities of what lay ahead. Snape showed her charms, explained the rules of the wizarding world, and promised her that Hogwarts would be theirs one day. Lily's laughter rang bright, and her kindness softened the edges of Snape's guarded heart. To him, she was not simply a friend. She was a lifeline, proof that he could belong, proof that someone could care. Those days by the riverbank were among the few bright memories of his childhood. Yet even then, shadows lingered. Petunia, resentful and uneasy, drew away, calling Snape strange, warning Lily against him. At home, the arguments between his parents grew sharper, and Severus often sought refuge outside, clutching his knowledge of magic like a shield. He dreamed of Hogwarts as a place where everything would change, a castle filled with spells and knowledge, where his talents would finally be valued. where Lily would be by his side. In the cracked brick streets of Spinner's End, Hogwarts became his imagined sanctuary, a shining vision against the gloom. Still, the boy who waited to leave was already marked by his childhood. He carried the scars of neglect, the sharpness of having been mocked and overlooked. His mind grew quick and defensive, his wit edged with bitterness. And yet, beneath all that, a part of him still longed for belonging, for recognition, for love. The boy from Spinner's End, wrapped in shadows and soot, would one day walk the candlelit halls of Hogwarts. But the echoes of his childhood would never fully fade. They would shape his choices, his loyalties, and his sorrows, following him like a shadow long after he left the narrow street behind. The meeting that changed Snape's life took place not in a grand hall or under a vaulted ceiling, but on the edge of a quiet riverbank. Lily Evans, a girl with auburn hair and a laugh that shimmered like bells, was his first glimpse of belonging. She had not yet set foot in Hogwarts, yet the magic in her veins was already blooming. Snape watched her conjure blossoms from nothing, leap from the ground with unseen force, her joy uncontained. For him, who had grown up in the shadows of Spinner's End, it was like watching light itself take form. Snape approached her with caution, shy, but driven by a need he could not name. He told her of magic, of wands, of spells, of the castle that would one day welcome them. She listened, wide-eyed, curious, open. In her company, he felt something he had never felt before: warmth. Their friendship deepened quickly, forged in secrets shared under summer skies and whispered promises of a future they would face together. Lily became his anchor. When the shouting of his parents drove him from the house, when Spinner's End felt suffocating, he clung to the thought of her laughter and the promise of Hogwarts. That promise came true in 1971, when the letter arrived. On the scarlet train to Hogwarts, Snape sat near Lily, nervous but protective, his eyes sharp at anyone who dared mock her Muggle-born heritage. Their bond seemed unshakable, yet the train also carried James Potter and Sirius Black, boys whose arrogance and easy laughter would one day fuel a rivalry that defined much of Snape's school life. In the sorting ceremony, Snape was placed in Slytherin, while Lily was sorted into Gryffindor. It was a division that would never quite heal. Though they remained friends, the houses pulled them apart. In the common room, surrounded by Slytherins, Snape found himself drawn to the darker currents of Hogwarts. He listened to older students whispering of power, of spells hidden deep in the restricted section, of Voldemort's rising followers beyond the castle walls. At first, it was curiosity, then fascination, and finally, temptation. Yet in the classroom, his brilliance was undeniable. Snape excelled in potions beyond even his professor's expectations, crafting brews with precision and creativity that rivaled masters. His notebooks filled with modifications, new instructions, sharper methods, shortcuts only a gifted mind could discover. He developed spells as well, clever and dangerous, etched in the margins with half-formed incantations. Sectum sempra, levicorpus, muffliato, creations of a restless mind, hungry to prove itself. For Lily, Snape's talent was both awe-inspiring and troubling. She admired his skill, but feared the dark circles forming around him. His fascination with the dark arts grew, as did his circle of Slytherin friends, boys and girls already drawn toward Voldemort's ideology. They spoke with disdain of Muggle-borns, whispered of purifying bloodlines, reveled in curses forbidden by the school. Snape, caught between two worlds, clung desperately to Lily's friendship, even as his choices threatened it. James Potter and Sirius Black became his tormentors. Proud Gryffindors, reckless and daring, they singled him out for mockery. In the courtyard by the lake, Snape often found himself hexed, humiliated, suspended upside down by magic before crowds of laughing students. His pride, already fragile, hardened into bitterness. He loathed James's arrogance, his easy popularity, his Quidditch talent, his way of commanding attention without effort. And most of all, he loathed that Lily seemed to laugh at James's jokes, even if she defended Snape afterwards. The breaking point came in their 5th year. In a moment of anger, pushed beyond his endurance by James's bullying, Snape lashed out at Lily herself, calling her the word he could never take back: mud blood. It was a slur born of the very ideology she despised, a wound that cut their friendship to its core. He apologized, begged forgiveness, but Lily, proud and principled, could not look past it. Their bond, once his lifeline, was broken. For Snape, the loss was devastating. He had built his hopes around her friendship, his love for her a constant in his otherwise lonely world. Now she turned away, choosing James's side more often than his, drawn into Gryffindor warmth, while he sank deeper into Slytherin shadows. That single word, spoken in fury, in pain, severed the last connection he had to light. Still, his brilliance continued. Professors noted his skill with admiration, though often tempered by unease at his interest in dark magic. He spent long nights in the library, candlelight flickering over parchment, experimenting with spells that blurred the line between genius and danger. His reputation grew. Clever, sharp, intimidating, always a step ahead in potions. To many, he seemed destined for great things. To Snape, greatness meant power, and perhaps the hope that with power he might never be humiliated again. Yet beneath it all lingered the boy from Spinner's End, lonely, yearning, wounded. He longed for Lily's forgiveness, even as his choices pushed her further away. He dreamed of recognition, yet carried humiliation in his bones. Hogwarts gave him knowledge, but it also gave him enemies, rivalries, and the pain of love lost. By the time Snape left Hogwarts in 1978, he was marked by both brilliance and bitterness. The friendships he once valued had frayed. Lily was lost to him, her path entwining with James Potter, his greatest rival. And Snape, aching and angry, stepped from the castle, not into the sanctuary he had once imagined, but into the shadow of a rising dark lord. When Snape left the walls of Hogwarts in 1978, he carried more than his knowledge of potions and spells. He carried humiliation, anger, and a heart broken by the loss of Lily Evans. He had spent years watching her grow closer to James Potter, his rival and tormentor, while his own choices, darker spells, dangerous companions, and harsh words had pushed her away. By the time he walked out beneath the shadow of the castle's gates, the path ahead of him seemed already lit by fire, the fire of a dark lord who promised power, recognition, and a place to belong. The wizarding world was shifting. Lord Voldemort was rising, his followers multiplying. Many young Slytherins, eager for influence and fearful of being left behind, aligned themselves with him. Snape was among them. He had long been fascinated by the dark arts, spells that bent the body, tore the mind, and unleashed destruction. To him, they were not simply tools of cruelty, but instruments of knowledge, ways to prove his brilliance. Now, in Voldemort's growing army, his knowledge became a currency. The initiation into the Death Eaters was not recorded in books, but those who bore the dark mark spoke of it as a mingling of terror and triumph. The mark, burned into the skin, was not simply a symbol, but a bond, a tether to the Dark Lord himself. For Snape, it was a moment of belonging, twisted though it was. For the first time, he stood among peers who valued his talent, who admired his skill in curses and potions. In their ranks, he was not the awkward boy from Spinner's End, mocked for his greasy hair and threadbare clothes. He was powerful. He quickly gained a reputation. Voldemort prized him for his intelligence, particularly his talent for potions and spellcraft. Snape brewed with precision, concocting poisons and elixirs, advising on magical theories that others barely understood. He was feared, too, for his dueling skills and his knowledge of dark incantations. His fellow Death Eaters respected him, though few truly knew him, for Snape remained what he had always been: guarded, secretive, closed off even among those he called allies. And yet, amid the nights of meetings and missions, one name still haunted him: Lily. He knew she had married James Potter, knew they were building a life together, but he could not let go of his love for her. Even as he served Voldemort, even as he whispered in shadows, her memory was a wound that never healed. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps obsession, perhaps both. But in his heart, he carried her as though she were the last piece of light he still possessed. The turning point came with a prophecy. In 1980, Snape was sent to the Hog's Head Inn in Hogsmeade. There, hidden in shadow, he overheard Sybil Trelawney's words: "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies." Snape reported what he heard to Voldemort, loyal in duty. But what seemed like a moment of service became the greatest regret of his life. For Voldemort, the prophecy was a map to a child who might destroy him. He chose the Potters. He chose Lily. When Snape realized the truth, despair consumed him. He begged Voldemort to spare her, not James, not Harry, but Lily alone. In his desperation, he turned not only to Voldemort, but also to the one man he had once scorned, Albus Dumbledore. He pleaded with him to protect her, to save her from the doom he had set in motion. It was a moment that reshaped his life forever. Lily's death, when it came in 1981, shattered him. Voldemort ignored his pleas and killed her, along with James, leaving only the infant Harry alive. For Snape, it was a wound that would never close. The woman he had loved, the one he had lost through his own cruelty, was gone because of the prophecy he had delivered. From that moment, his path with Voldemort darkened into something else entirely. A vow of penance, a double life built not on ambition, but on guilt and love. Still, in those early years, before her death, Snape had lived as a Death Eater. He had carried out missions, worn the dark mark with grim pride, stood in ranks where cruelty was celebrated. The boy from Spinner's End, hungry for power and respect, had become a man of shadows. And yet, even in that darkness, the light of Lily's memory never left him. It was hidden, buried, sometimes twisted by anger, but it remained. Looking back, Spinner's End had prepared him for this life. The shouting of his parents, the loneliness of his childhood, the longing for belonging, all had led him to Voldemort's service. But the same boy who had found a friend by the river, who had once dreamed of Hogwarts as sanctuary, still lived within him, aching for something better. In those days, however, Snape did not yet know that Dumbledore would offer him a way forward, or that he would spend the rest of his life walking a line between light and dark. For now, he was simply Snape, Death Eater, spy, and man, whose choices had bound him to a fate far larger than he could see. The year was 1980, and whispers of war echoed through every corner of the wizarding world. Voldemort's power was growing, his followers multiplying, and fear seemed stitched into the very air. It was during this time that Snape, still young, but already deeply entrenched among the Death Eaters, stumbled upon a secret that would change everything. A prophecy spoken in a dimly lit room above the Hog's Head Inn. Sybil Trelawney, a woman with wide, misty eyes and a voice that often quavered with uncertainty, had entered into a rare state of true prophecy. Hidden in the shadows, Snape listened as her words spilled forth, heavy with destiny. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. To a loyal Death Eater, the meaning was clear. A child was coming. A child who might destroy Voldemort. Snape, eager to prove his worth, carried this fragment of prophecy straight to his master. It was the act of a spy, routine, almost thoughtless, and yet it would haunt him for the rest of his life. For Voldemort, the prophecy became an obsession. He examined it, turning over every word, narrowing his gaze to 2 possible children, Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter. And when he chose Harry, Snape's world collapsed. The Potters, James and Lily, were the target. When the realization struck, Snape's knees nearly buckled beneath him. Lily, the girl he had loved since childhood, the only person who had ever offered him kindness, was in mortal danger because of him. His breath came ragged, guilt clawing at him, fear burning like fur in his chest. He had given Voldemort the prophecy, and in doing so, he had condemned her. In desperation, he turned to the Dark Lord himself. Kneeling before Voldemort, he begged for Lily's life. "Spare her," he pleaded. "Kill the boy, kill the husband, but not Lily." His voice cracked with a rawness his fellow Death Eaters had never heard. Voldemort regarded him with a strange, cold amusement. To Voldemort, love was weakness, and weakness was despised. Yet he promised he would consider Snape's request. But Snape knew promises meant little to a man who feared nothing but death. So he sought the only person who might still help, Albus Dumbledore. The meeting between them was tense, fraught with years of mistrust. Snape, the Death Eater, stood before Dumbledore, the champion of the Order of the Phoenix. For a moment, pride nearly strangled him, but his fear for Lily overcame all else. He dropped to his knees and begged, "Hide them. Keep them safe." Dumbledore's sharp blue eyes pierced him. "And what will you give me in return, Severus?" Snape's answer was simple and devastating. Anything. It was not enough. Despite his pleas, despite the Fidelius charm placed upon the Potter's home, betrayal came through Peter Pettigrew, and Voldemort found them. On that Halloween night in 1981, Snape's world ended. Voldemort entered Godric's Hollow. James Potter fell first, wand raised, but overpowered. Lily stood in the nursery, Harry cradled behind her. She begged for her child's life, refused to step aside. And Voldemort, true to his nature, ignored Snape's desperate request. The green flash of the killing curse ended her life. Her death tore through Snape like a blade. He was not there to see it, but when he learned the truth, his grief was bottomless. He had betrayed her, and she was gone. The boy survived. Voldemort was destroyed. But for Snape, the victory meant nothing. Lily was dead, and it was his fault. When he collapsed before Dumbledore again, broken and hollow, his request was no longer to save Lily, but to protect her son. "He has her eyes," Dumbledore reminded him. And in those words, Snape found both punishment and purpose. He vowed to guard Harry, not out of love for the boy, but out of love for the woman who had died for him. It was an oath that would bind him for the rest of his life. From that moment, Snape became a double agent. By day, he remained a Death Eater in Voldemort's ranks, convincing those around him of his loyalty. By night, he was Dumbledore's spy, feeding information to the Order, shielding Harry where he could. His life became a web of lies, each strand dangerous, each step a risk. But the weight he carried was heavier than secrecy. It was grief, endless and unrelenting. In quiet moments, Alone in his chamber, he thought of Lily. Her laughter, her kindness, the way she had once believed in him. He saw her face in Harry's eyes, a cruel reminder of what he had lost. And he hated James's features that surrounded them. To love the boy was impossible, but to protect him was necessary. It was the only way to honor the woman whose memory he carried like a wound. And so, out of love and guilt, Snape turned his life toward a single path: to atone, to serve, to protect. Even if it meant he would be forever misunderstood, forever despised. That was the tragedy of Snape. His love, once bright and unspoken, became the chain that bound him. And from Lily's death onward, every choice he made, every risk, every betrayal, every act of harshness was shaped by the promise he had given on his knees. Anything. When Lily Evans died on that October night, Snape's life fractured into two halves: the man who had once served Voldemort, and the man who now served Dumbledore. To the world, he was still a Death Eater. To Voldemort's followers, he remained one of their own, clever and dangerous. But beneath that mask, Snape was something else entirely. A spy, living each day on the edge of exposure, feeding Dumbledore secrets that might one day tip the balance of war. For Dumbledore, Snape's transformation was a test of trust. To allow a former Death Eater into the Order of the Phoenix was a gamble. But he saw the depth of Snape's remorse, the rawness of his grief. The memory of Lily's eyes in Harry's face became a bond between them, silent but binding. From that day forward, Snape's loyalty to Dumbledore was absolute. The war raged on. Voldemort vanished, broken by the very child he had tried to kill, and his followers scattered, some imprisoned, some hiding, some claiming they had been bewitched. Snape, thanks to Dumbledore's testimony, avoided Azkaban. He had been a spy, Dumbledore said, working against Voldemort all along. It was not the full truth, but it was enough to spare him. Still, whispers clung to him. A former Death Eater. Walking free was a thing many found difficult to forgive. It was Dumbledore who placed him at Hogwarts as potions master. For Snape, returning to the castle was a strange sort of homecoming. The stone walls, the drafty corridors, the echoing dungeons, all were familiar, but no longer as a student. Now he stood at the front of the classroom, robes billowing, wand in hand, watching rows of young witches and wizards bend over cauldrons. He was not warm, not encouraging. His teaching was sharp, sarcastic, often cruel. To Gryffindors especially, he was merciless, singling them out with cutting remarks and punishing them harshly for mistakes. But beneath the surface, his role at Hogwarts was not only that of a teacher, it was a cover. Dumbledore needed eyes within the castle, someone who could see what others could not, someone who could remain in place when Voldemort inevitably returned. Snape filled that role with precision, slipping between masks so seamlessly that even his colleagues often wondered where his true loyalties lay. It was in these years that Harry Potter returned to Hogwarts, the boy with Lily's eyes. For Snape, seeing Harry was like reopening a wound that had never healed. Every glance at those green eyes reminded him of Lily. But Harry's face was also James's. The messy black hair, the arrogance, the defiance. To love the boy was impossible, yet to protect him was his sworn duty. And so, Snape's feelings twisted into a complicated knot of bitterness and reluctant guardianship. He would sneer at Harry, belittle him, punish him, but he would also throw his arm before him when danger loomed, counter curses in the shadows, and report back to Dumbledore with every scrap of information that might keep him alive. The years turned into a pattern of secrecy. To his Slytherin students, Snape was a mentor, favoring them openly, shielding them when others might not. To Gryffindors, he was a tormentor. To his colleagues, he was sharp and difficult, respected for his knowledge, but never beloved. And all the while, the double life went on. It was a lonely existence. He could not explain himself to anyone. He could not reveal his grief, his love, his guilt. Even among the Order of the Phoenix, suspicion lingered. Some never trusted him, never forgot the dark mark burned into his skin. He bore it in silence, for to complain would mean revealing too much. In the quiet of the dungeons, Snape lived surrounded by potion. The stone shelves gleamed with jars of pickled roots and shimmering liquids. Cauldrons bubbled with draughts and poisons. It was a world he could control, unlike the chaos of his own heart. Here, ingredients bent to his will, mixtures followed rules. In the precise stirring of a cauldron, in the measured addition of powdered root, he found solace. But even in the stillness of the dungeon, shadows lingered. The dark mark on his arm never truly faded. It was a reminder that his master might return at any time, that his double life might one day demand more than secrecy. It might demand his soul. And so, year after year, Snape walked a razor's edge. To most, he was bitter, cruel, a man who had never outgrown childhood grudges. To Dumbledore, he was indispensable, to Voldemort's followers, should they resurface, he was still one of them. Only Snape knew the truth, that everything he did, every risk he took, every lie he told, was in service to a single memory, the face of a girl who had once smiled at him by the river. When the war's noise finally quieted and Voldemort was gone, Hogwarts resumed its rhythm, but not without shadows. In the dungeons, a new master of potions presided over cauldrons and shelves lined with jars. Snape had returned to the place that had defined his youth, no longer as a boy, desperate for belonging, but as a man cloaked in authority. The classroom reflected his personality, dark, cold, and severe. Jars filled with slimy roots, preserved creatures, and glittering powders lined the walls like a silent audience. Cauldrons bubbled under dim light, steam carrying pungent smells that clung to every robe. Students filed in nervously, knowing that one misstep could invite a sneer or a biting remark. Snape's voice cut through the haze, soft but sharp, every word deliberate. He expected precision, demanded perfection, and had no patience for foolishness. To Slytherins, he was lenient, protective, even indulgent. He encouraged their talents, overlooked their mistakes, and shielded them when other professors might have punished them. To Gryffindors, however, he was merciless, a mismeasured root, a drop too many of salamander blood, a whispered word out of turn, all could earn them biting sarcasm or the loss of points. To many, it seemed he carried his schoolyard grudges into adulthood, punishing James Potter's house as though the rivalry had never ended. And then came the boy himself, Harry Potter. When Snape first looked upon Harry, 11 years old, wearing glasses and carrying the weight of a legacy he did not understand, the shock was immediate. The eyes, Lily's eyes, stared back at him from James Potter's face. It was unbearable. Every glance was a reminder of the woman he loved and the man he despised. The boy had done nothing, yet he carried within him the cruelest contrast of Snape's life. His treatment of Harry became legendary. From the very first class, Snape singled him out, asking difficult questions designed to humiliate. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? He asked, knowing the boy could not answer. Points were taken unfairly, harsh words hurled at every mistake. To Harry, Snape was an enemy, a tormentor. To the rest of the school, he was a figure of fear and disdain. But beneath the cruelty, another layer existed, one that Harry could not see. Snape watched him carefully, intervening in subtle ways when danger loomed. During Quidditch, when Harry's broomstick bucked and swerved under a curse, it was Snape muttering counterspells to keep him from falling. When danger approached the stone, when threats arose in shadows, Snape was often nearby, ensuring the boy survived. His protection was invisible, hidden behind a mask of contempt. To colleagues, Snape remained an enigma. Minerva McGonagall clashed with him over his harshness, while others simply accepted his brilliance in potions. Few trusted him fully. Whispers of his past as a Death Eater lingered in staff rooms and corridors. He kept to himself, his friendships few, his loyalties hidden. Only Dumbledore knew the full truth, and even he sometimes seemed wary of the storm brewing beneath Snape's surface. Students feared him, yet many also respected his knowledge. He could brew with precision that left others awestruck, his instructions so exact that even the most complex potions seemed possible under his guidance. When he demonstrated, his hands moved with practiced grace, chopping, stirring, pouring with a control born of years of obsession. And though he rarely praised, the rare nod of approval was worth more than a dozen compliments from any other professor. Still, his bitterness was ever present. He despised foolishness, mocked Neville Longbottom for his clumsiness, and belittled Hermione Granger despite her brilliance. To Harry, Ron, and their friends, Snape became the embodiment of injustice. Yet the truth was more complicated. Each sharp remark, each point unfairly deducted, each punishment handed out served as a wall, a way to keep students at a distance, to ensure no one ever glimpsed the grief and loyalty buried within him. In those years, the dark mark on his arm still burned faintly. Snape knew Voldemort was not gone forever. The bond between master and servant lingered, a reminder that his double life was not finished. And so he remained in place at Hogwarts, teaching potions by day, watching, waiting, preparing. His cruelty kept others away, but his vigilance kept Harry alive. For Snape, the years as a teacher were years of isolation. His dungeons were a world apart from the warmth of the great hall or the laughter of the common rooms. He walked the corridors like a shadow, robes billowing, eyes always narrowed, mind always turning. His life was no longer his own. It belonged to a promise made on his knees, a vow whispered through tears. And though the students never saw it, though even the staff rarely guessed, every insult, every sneer, every harsh word was balanced by acts unseen. A protective charm, a watchful gaze, a dangerous piece of information carried to Dumbledore, Snape bore the hatred of others so that Harry could bear the hope of the world. That was his life at Hogwarts. Teacher, tormentor, protector, spy, all roles woven together into the figure of a man most misunderstood. And as the years passed, as Harry grew older, as Voldemort stirred once more, Snape's role in the castle became ever more vital, ever more dangerous. The boy with Lily's eyes was not the only one growing into his destiny. Snape, too, was moving toward the moment where his double life would be tested, when every lie, every sneer, every mask he had worn would finally be stripped away. The quiet years at Hogwarts were never truly quiet for Snape. Even as the castle thrummed with ordinary life, the clatter of cutlery in the great hall, the distant cheers from the Quidditch pitch, the whisper of parchment in the library, his dark mark never let him forget what waited beyond. It pulsed faintly on his arm, like a wound that refused to heal. It was not a matter of if Voldemort would return, but when. That moment came in Harry's 4th year, on a night drenched in shadow and fear. The Triwizard Tournament, meant to be a spectacle of unity and skill, had ended in horror. Cedric Diggory was dead, struck down without mercy, and Harry returned, clutching the story of Voldemort's rebirth. Few believed him at first, but Snape did. He had always known the Dark Lord was not truly gone. The faint burn on his arm now seared with fresh fire. Voldemort had returned. For Snape, this was the beginning of his most dangerous years. His double life, once dormant, now roared into urgency. Voldemort called his followers back, and Snape answered, slipping the mask of Death Eater over his face once more. The Dark Lord's eyes searched him with suspicion, but Snape's brilliance in deception carried him through. He spoke with quiet conviction, explaining his absence, his loyalty, and his usefulness. He knew potions, he knew spells, he knew the inner workings of Hogwarts. Voldemort accepted him back, though perhaps never with full trust. To Dumbledore, Snape returned with reports that others could not obtain. He walked into meetings thick with danger, then carried secrets back across the divide, each time risking exposure. It was a razor's edge, and he walked it with unmatched precision. These years tested him more than ever. Voldemort demanded his loyalty, ordered him to brew, to curse, to advise. Among Death Eaters, Snape kept his mask fixed. He listened as cruelty was planned, stood by while others delighted in pain. Inside, he steeled himself, knowing that to reveal even a flicker of doubt was to invite death. Back at Hogwarts, his role deepened. Dumbledore leaned on him more heavily, confiding in him truths that no other professor could know. The bond between them, forged in the night of Lily's death, now became a partnership of necessity. Snape became Dumbledore's most trusted agent, though their relationship was rarely warm. Respect, reliance, even a kind of grim admiration existed between them, but not affection. The weight of the prophecy still hung over Snape. Harry was the boy marked by fate, the child Voldemort had failed to kill. Protecting him was still Snape's charge, and now the danger multiplied. He shielded Harry in subtle ways. Misinformation passed to Voldemort, protective magic hidden in plain sight, and interventions that went unseen. And yet, his bitterness never softened. His cruelty toward Harry sharpened. His sneers deepened. The boy remained both reminder and punishment. Lily's eyes framed by James's face. Protecting him was duty, not kindness. Even as Voldemort's power grew, Snape maintained his facade. Among Death Eaters, he was feared for his intellect and valued for his knowledge. In Voldemort's inner circle, he was a shadow among shadows, careful to speak only what was safe, never revealing how much he carried back to Dumbledore. Few suspected the truth. To them, Snape was ruthless, ambitious, perfectly placed within the ranks of the Dark Lord. But the cost was high. Each day demanded deception. Each night carried the weight of lies. In solitude, Snape bore the toll of his double life. His chambers in the dungeons became his refuge, where he could, at last, lower his mask. Surrounded by shelves of potions and the flicker of firelight, he let the exhaustion wash over him. Still, even in rest, his thoughts returned to Lily. The reason he endured, the reason he risked everything. The return of Voldemort marked not only the renewal of Snape's mission, but also the tightening of his chains. Every choice carried peril. Every step threatened to expose him. Yet he pressed on, unwavering. He had given Dumbledore his word. He had whispered anything. And so, in the years after Voldemort's rebirth, Snape became the hinge upon which the war turned. His loyalty remained invisible, his sacrifices unnoticed, his life lived in shadows. Few would ever understand the courage it took to deceive Voldemort while protecting the very boy he despised. But in those long, perilous years, Snape's path moved steadily toward the fate that awaited him, a fate bound by love, by guilt, and by a vow that would never release him. By the time Voldemort had fully returned to power, the danger at Hogwarts had grown sharper, heavier, like a storm pressing against the castle walls. Snape lived his double life more precariously than ever, balancing on the knife's edge of loyalty and betrayal. And it was during these fraught years that he was bound by a promise that would test the very limits of his endurance. When Draco Malfoy, still barely more than a boy, was given the impossible task of killing Dumbledore, fear rippled through his family. Narcissa Malfoy, desperate to protect her son, sought out Snape in a small, dimly lit sitting room. With Bellatrix, Lestrange glaring suspiciously from the shadows, Narcissa fell to her knees and begged. She begged Snape to protect her son, to ensure that he would not meet death if he failed. And there, with Bellatrix watching intently, Snape sealed his fate. He made the unbreakable vow, a binding, magical oath that, if broken, would cost him his life. He vowed to protect Draco, to watch over him, and, if it came to it, to finish the task Voldemort had set for him. His wand touched Narcissa's, the threads of fire winding around them, binding him with words that could never be undone. For Snape, it was not only loyalty to Narcissa, not only strategy in the face of Voldemort's suspicions. It was something else, a burden already laid upon him by Dumbledore himself. The headmaster was dying. A cursed ring, one Snape had tried to contain, had already doomed him. Dumbledore's time was limited, and he, with his usual calm foresight, asked Snape to be the one to end his life when the moment came. It was not a request, but a command that pierced to the bone. Dumbledore, whose trust Snape had carried since Lily's death, now laid upon him the greatest weight of all. To kill him, to take his life when Draco could not, to spare the boy's soul and strengthen Snape's position in Voldemort's ranks. Snape argued, resisted, pleaded, but Dumbledore's resolve was immovable. "It is my wish," he said. And so Snape bore the impossible, agreeing to a task that would stain him forever in the eyes of all. The months that followed were heavy with secrecy. Draco stumbled through his task, attempting assassination after assassination, each attempt clumsy, each one failing. Snape watched him closely, guiding him where he could, without revealing too much. He could see the weight dragging on the boy, see the fear in his eyes, and always the unbreakable vow pressed on Snape's mind like iron shackles. Then came that night on the astronomy tower. The air was cold, the stars distant and sharp. Dumbledore, weakened from the cursed ring and disarmed by Draco, stood cornered. Death Eaters pressed in, watching eagerly, waiting for Draco to strike. The boy's wand trembled. His face was pale, his hands unsteady. And in that moment, Snape climbed the stairs, every step echoing like a tolling bell. When Dumbledore's eyes found him, they were calm. No fear, no anger, only trust. Trust in the man who had once been his spy. Trust in the promise made years before. Trust in the vow whispered between them in shadows. Severus, please. The words were not a plea for mercy. They were a reminder. And Snape raised his wand. The green light of the killing curse illuminated the tower, brighter than the stars, brighter than the torches that flickered below. Dumbledore fell, his body crumpling from the tower. His death, a shock wave that reverberated through the school, through the order, through the wizarding world itself. To all who watched, Snape had revealed his true nature. He was Voldemort's man, murderer of Dumbledore, traitor to the light. But the truth, buried deep, was more complicated. Snape had fulfilled his vow to Narcissa, had carried out Dumbledore's dying wish, had spared Draco's soul, and ensured his own place within Voldemort's confidence. It was an act of loyalty, disguised as betrayal, mercy cloaked in murder. And yet, for Snape himself, it was agony. To kill the man who had trusted him beyond all others, to carry that burden without explanation, was a torment that would never leave him. The aftermath was chaos. Students screamed, the castle rang with alarms, and Death Eaters fled into the night. Harry, frozen in disbelief, burned with rage and grief. To him, Snape was now the ultimate villain. All his sneers, all his cruelty, all his harshness, now justified in Harry's eyes as proof of treachery. The boy chased him through the castle, curses flying, shouts echoing off stone walls. Snape deflected each spell with ease, his voice cold, his movements controlled. But when Harry called him a coward, a flicker of fury broke through his mask. "Don't call me coward!" he roared, the words carrying the weight of years, of sacrifices unseen. By the time Snape disappeared into the night with the fleeing Death Eaters, his reputation was sealed. The wizarding world would remember him now as Dumbledore's killer, Voldemort's trusted servant, the traitor who had struck down the one man they all believed untouchable. But in truth, the night on the tower was the culmination of everything Snape's life had been. A boy who had once longed for belonging, a man who had sworn to protect Lily's son, a spy who had walked between light and shadow. All of it led to that single act. It was both the most damning and the most loyal moment of his life. And so, with the tower behind him and Dumbledore gone, Snape stepped fully into his final role. Headmaster of Hogwarts, servant of Voldemort, and still, in secret, protector of the boy with Lily's eyes. When the dust of the astronomy tower settled and Dumbledore was gone, the wizarding world reeled. The man who had been the great protector of Hogwarts, the one many believed could never fall, lay dead. And Snape was branded the traitor who had struck him down. To most, it seemed Voldemort had placed his most faithful servant in the heart of the castle. And so, in the autumn that followed, Severus Snape became headmaster of Hogwarts. The office, once Dumbledore's sanctuary of eccentric warmth, felt colder now. The trinkets and silver instruments that had hummed and whirred under Dumbledore's hand were silenced. The portraits of past headmasters whispered among themselves, watching this new occupant with wary eyes. Snape sat behind the desk, not with pride, but with a grimness that cloaked his every breath. For him, this was not victory. It was a burden. The castle itself reflected the change. Dark shadows lingered in the corridors. The Carrows, Amicus and Alecto, brutal Death Eaters loyal to Voldemort, were placed as deputy heads and enforcers. They stalked the halls, punishing students with curses, reveling in cruelty. For many children, Hogwarts no longer felt like home, but like a prison. The laughter that once echoed through the common rooms grew hushed, replaced by fear and silence. And yet, beneath the surface, Snape's role remained what it had always been: protector. He wore the mask of authority, speaking harshly, carrying himself with the coldness expected of Voldemort's man. But behind closed doors, he worked tirelessly to shield students from the Carrows' worst abuses. He redirected punishments, subtly lessened sentences, and intervened when danger grew too great. Many never realized how often his unseen hand kept them from harm. Neville Longbottom, who grew into unexpected bravery during this time, would later recall how Snape's presence was never as cruel as the Carrows. Though he punished, though he sneered, there was a line he would not cross. When Neville and others formed Dumbledore's army in secret, Snape knew more than he ever revealed. The Room of Requirement became their refuge, and though the Carrows hunted for it, they never found it. Whether by design or by quiet allowance, Snape never forced the castle to give up its secrets. His days were filled with a careful balancing act. To Voldemort, he appeared the perfect servant, running the school with ruthless efficiency, stamping out rebellion. To the staff, he was a tyrant, though some suspected something deeper. To the students, he was a figure of fear, a shadow presiding over their suffering. Only Snape himself knew the truth, that every harsh word, every act of apparent cruelty was part of the mask he had to wear to maintain his place and protect them as best he could. It was a lonely reign. Gone were the warm feasts, the booming laughter of Dumbledore, the feeling of safety that had once filled the castle. Snape ate little, spoke rarely, and spent long hours alone in the headmaster's office, the weight of memory pressing down upon him. On the walls, the portraits of former headmasters shifted uneasily, their painted eyes following him. Some questioned, some doubted, but a few, who had seen Dumbledore's final instructions, kept their silence. And then there was the boy. Harry Potter was out in the world now, hunted by Voldemort, chased across Britain with his friends. Snape could not guide him openly, could not protect him in person, but he still found ways to send him help, cloaked in secrecy. It was Snape who passed the sword of Gryffindor to him in the Forest of Dean, ensuring Harry had what he needed to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes. It was Snape who kept watch from afar, waiting for the moment when the truth of his role would finally be revealed. Through it all, his loyalty to Lily never wavered. Each time he saw Harry's face in the Daily Prophet, each time whispers of the boy's movements reached him, he thought of her. Protecting Harry was still the only way to keep the promise he had made, the promise that had defined his entire life. But the world would never know this truth. Not yet. To the students and staff, Snape was a villain. To the Carrows, he was an ally. To Voldemort, he was indispensable. And to himself, he was nothing but a weary man, trapped in a role he had never sought, carrying burdens that few could imagine. The year wore on, and the war pressed ever closer to the castle. Rumors grew louder. Harry was coming back. The school, trembling under the weight of fear, waited for the storm to break. And Snape, seated in the high office of the headmaster, knew that when the time came, his mask would finally be torn away, and the truth of his life would be revealed. The night the Battle of Hogwarts began, the castle trembled with life in a way Snape had never felt before. Students whispered in corridors, teachers gathered in defiance, and a tide of resistance rose against the dark power pressing at the gates. For months, the school had been ruled by fear, its walls shadowed by cruelty. But now the tide was shifting. Harry Potter had returned. Snape felt it the moment the boy stepped back into the castle's walls. The castle itself seemed to know, its magic stirring, its portraits whispering. Harry had come home, and with him came the inevitability of the final clash. For Snape, this was the moment he had both dreaded and awaited. The moment when all the years of secrecy, deception, and sacrifice would be tested. Yet, to the students and staff, he was still the enemy. When Harry entered the Great Hall, Snape faced him with a cold mask, wand in hand. It was not a duel of power, but of perception. To everyone watching, Snape was still Voldemort's man, the traitor who had murdered Dumbledore. Before the fight could break, however, Professor McGonagall stepped forward, fury blazing in her eyes. Their duel lit the hall with fire and sparks, McGonagall's transfigurations crashing against Snape's defenses. And yet, Snape never struck to harm. He parried, deflected, absorbed each spell, retreating rather than advancing. When the hall filled with reinforcements, he broke free and vanished into the night, leaving behind only confusion and hatred. Outside the castle, the battle raged. Giants roared, spells crackled across the darkened grounds, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the night. Snape knew his time was short. Voldemort had summoned him. The Dark Lord was waiting in the shrieking shack, that broken, abandoned house where shadows clung to splintered walls. Nagini coiled in her protective sphere, hissing softly, her fangs glinting with venom. Voldemort's face, pale and snake-like, was colder than ever, and his suspicion, sharp as a knife, had turned toward Snape. Voldemort believed the Elder Wand, that fabled weapon of death, was not answering to him because its loyalty belonged to another. To Snape. Dumbledore had fallen by Snape's hand, and so the Dark Lord reasoned the wand's allegiance had passed to him. It was a fatal miscalculation, and Snape knew it the moment Voldemort's crimson eyes fixed upon him. There was no time to plead, no chance to argue. Voldemort spoke with chilling calm, as though offering a gift. "Nagini," he whispered. And the serpent struck. Her fangs sank into Snape's neck, venom burning, blood spilling in hot rivulets down his robes. He staggered, the life draining from him, even as Voldemort turned away, convinced he had solved the wand's mystery. The shack echoed with silence once the Dark Lord was gone, save for the rattling breath of a dying man. And then Harry was there, Snape's eyes, clouded with pain, locked on the boy's. For years, he had despised that face, James's hair framing Lily's eyes. For years, he had snarled at him, belittled him, punished him, while secretly protecting him. And now, at the very end, there was no time left for explanations, only truth. His voice rasped, words broken by pain. Take it. From the well of his memories, silvery threads spilled forth, shimmering like liquid light. They pooled in Harry's hand, fragile and glimmering, the story of a life hidden for too long, memories of Spinner's End, of Lily by the riverbank, of a promise made to Dumbledore, of years spent in shadows for the sake of love. Snape's hand shook as he reached up, his fingers brushing Harry's cheek. Look at me, he whispered. And as Harry's green eyes met his own, Snape saw Lily's eyes for the last time, the eyes that had haunted him, driven him, given his life purpose. In that final gaze, he was not looking at James's son, not at the boy he had called arrogant and foolish. He was looking at Lily, the girl he had loved all his life. The light faded from his eyes, and with it, the long, tormented journey of Severus Snape came to an end. But his story did not end there. When Harry poured the memories into the pensieve, the truth unfurled at last. He saw Snape's childhood, lonely and dark. He saw Lily, laughing by the river. He saw the broken friendship, the cruel word that had severed them, and the endless love that had endured even after her death. He saw Snape's vow to Dumbledore, his desperate plea to protect Lily's son, his willingness to sacrifice everything for her memory. He saw the tower, Dumbledore's calm request, and Snape's agony as he fulfilled it. The boy who had despised Snape, who had believed him a villain, now saw the truth, that every sneer, every harsh lesson, every shadowed glance had been the mark of a man who bore the heaviest of burdens. Snape had been Dumbledore's most loyal ally, Voldemort's most dangerous spy, and above all, the guardian of a promise born of love. As dawn broke over the castle and the war drew to its end, Snape's body lay in the shrieking shack, uncelebrated, misunderstood. Yet his legacy lived in Harry's heart, in the truth revealed by his memories. He had been, in the end, one of the bravest men Harry had ever known. When the dust of the Battle of Hogwarts settled and silence finally returned to the castle, the story of Severus Snape was far from over. His body lay cold in the shrieking shack, overlooked in the rush of victory, forgotten amidst the joy and grief of a world that had just torn itself free from Voldemort's shadow. For many, he remained a villain, the traitor who had killed Dumbledore, the man whose sneers and punishments had made their years at school harder. His name carried bitterness on their tongues. But truth, like memory, has a way of rising to the surface. Harry Potter carried that truth with him. In the hours after Voldemort's defeat, when the castle's rubble still smoldered and families searched for their loved ones, Harry knew the time had come to share what Snape had given him. The memories poured from the Pensieve, winding like silver threads into the eyes of those who would listen. They revealed the boy from Spinner's End, the lonely child who had found light in Lily Evans's laughter. They showed the cruel word that had broken their friendship, the grief of her death, and the vow he had made to protect her son. They showed Dumbledore's calm request atop the tower, and Snape's agony as he obeyed. For the first time, the world saw Snape not as villain or hero, but as something far more complex. A man who had lived in shadows, whose love had defined his choices, whose sacrifices had remained unseen. To many, the revelation was jarring. Could the same man who mocked Neville, who belittled Harry, who cut Gryffindors down with cruel words, truly have been their protector all along? Could the one who carried the dark mark have also been the one who ultimately betrayed Voldemort from within? The contradiction was difficult to accept, and yet it was true. In the years that followed, Snape's name slowly shifted in tone. Harry, in particular, ensured that his memory was not lost. When he stood years later with Ginny and their children, watching them board the Scarlet train to Hogwarts, he honored Snape in the most intimate way by naming his son Albus Severus Potter. "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts," he told the boy, "and one of them was a Slytherin, and he was the bravest man I ever knew." It was a declaration that rippled outward. To Harry's children, Snape became not just a harsh teacher from old stories, but a figure of courage, of sacrifice. To the wizarding world, he became a reminder that people could not always be judged by appearances, by cruelty, or even by their worst mistakes. His life was a lesson in complexity, that one could be both bitter and loyal, both harsh and selfless, both deeply flawed and unimaginably brave. Still, his legacy was not without shadow. Many who had suffered under his teaching never forgot his cruelty. Some believed that, no matter his sacrifices, he had gone too far, that his love for Lily had blinded him to compassion for others. His bitterness left scars that no memory could erase. And yet, others argued that this was what made his story all the more remarkable, that even someone so steeped in anger, so consumed by regret, could choose to do what was right when it mattered most. Hogwarts itself seemed to remember him. The dungeons, with their cold stone and flickering torchlight, still carried the echo of his footsteps. The potions classroom bore the traces of his precision, the faint smell of asphodel and wormwood lingering in the air. The headmaster's office, once filled with Dumbledore's warmth, bore the memory of Snape's quiet solitude, his long nights staring into the fire, planning for a future no one else could see. For those who knew the truth, Snape became a symbol of hidden courage. His portrait, eventually hung in the headmaster's office, stared down with the same dark, piercing eyes, a reminder of the man who had lived in shadows so that others could live in light. Students would glance at it, some with unease, some with curiosity, a few with respect. The story of his life, passed down in whispers, carried weight. And for Harry, his memory remained personal. Whenever he looked into his son's green eyes, whenever he thought of the sacrifices that had shaped his own survival, he remembered Snape. Not as a perfect man, not as a gentle teacher, but as someone who had given everything for love. That, perhaps, was Snape's true legacy. Not heroism free of fault, not villainy without reason, but a life defined by a single, unwavering thread: his love for Lily. It was love that bound him to Dumbledore, love that drove him to protect Harry, love that sustained him through years of bitterness and sacrifice. In the end, it was love that made him brave. So when the castle stood quiet at night, when the stars shimmered over the black lake and the portraits whispered in the dark, one could imagine that Snape's presence lingered still. A figure in dark robes, moving silently through the dungeon, watching over the students who slept unaware of the man who had once guarded their future at the cost of his own. And so, the story of Severus Snape comes to its quiet end. A life of shadows, of secrets, of choices made in silence, now laid bare like pages turned slowly in the firelight. He was never simple, never easy to love, and never easy to hate. But through bitterness and sacrifice, he carried a promise to its very end, and gave more than most ever knew. As you drift now, let your thoughts soften. Picture the dungeons of Hogwarts, not cold and harsh, but hushed and still. Shelves lined with jars gleam faintly in candlelight. Cauldrons sit silent, and somewhere, beyond stone walls, the black lake ripples under the moon. Imagine the echo of footsteps fading down a corridor, the sweep of robes disappearing into the dark. Not menace, not cruelty, just quiet, just solitude, just a man who gave everything for love. Let the castle's stillness wrap around you. Let the whispers of portraits, the hum of enchanted ceilings, and the memory of green eyes, Lily's eyes, guide you into calm. Snape's story is finished, his burdens laid down, but his legacy, tangled and enduring, lives on in the hearts of those who learned the truth. Breathe deeply now. Close your eyes. You've walked through a life of shadows and sacrifice, and now it's time to rest. Sleep, knowing that even the most misunderstood souls can carry within them a rare kind of courage. Sleep with the knowledge that love, in all its forms, endures. Good night, my dear wizard. May your dreams be peaceful.